I'm not, yes, sir, it goes, okay. Need a Mary Mountain Council microphone to be overhead. Thank you very much, Miriam. That's great. Excellent. Okay, so we left off talking about Van Gogh, and we were looking at post-impressionism, which is a term they didn't use. For the artists working in the 1880s and 1890s, what we were finding with post-impressionists is that they are moving in a different direction from the impressionists, right? And in particular, they're moving away from objectivity, right? The impressionists, or all of the interest in sort of non-photographic brushwork, right? Happy to see their hand and how they painted. Their final work, sort of their objective, was to achieve through paint something similar to objective reality, right? To follow light at a particular moment. And what we see with Van Gogh and with the post-impressionists is a move towards subjectivity on one hand, right? So the work becomes as much interested. It's hard to put this. The work of art has sort of said two things. One is what it's represented, right? So the painting itself, right? But then the painting also says something else here, which is how do you paint it? And with post-impressionism, and as we move to the end of the 19th century, those two things start to become sort of co-equal, right? So, and that's true of impressionism as well, but there's still realism. There's still realism of what they're depicting. And it's important in modern Paris. The subject matter is terribly important. But as we move to Van Gogh, who cares about Van Gogh about portrait and Van Gogh? You know what I mean? So, with that in mind, the painting subject matter, if you will, is not necessarily what it represents. The painting subject matter is that dialogue between the artist and their work. And when we love Van Gogh, when people who love Van Gogh talk about what they love about Van Gogh, that's the thing that they love. More than his face, more than those irises that sold for $52 million, right? More than the new work, it's not necessarily the subject matter. It's that psychological insight that we get from looking at how we paint. That's the appeal. Right? And that's a really important thing for modern art, because what we're going to see, of course, is that one of the things of our flow chart from Tuesday is we're moving in a way toward non-representation. We're moving toward abstraction. Consistency. Right? So that's kind of one of the rest of the motion. So how do we explain that? Loss of subject matter. Part of it is, again, this dialogue is in one corner. Van Gogh's thoughts and feelings, none of that's going to record because it came on the fly. Van Gogh's thoughts and feelings, I'm just going to hold it. Van Gogh's thoughts and feelings, I don't know how long it's going to play. Van Gogh's thoughts and feelings, just lost it now. Rather than what he's painted. Now that said, what he paints is still very important. I'm going to show you these two things from different ones. Over to Phillips, and again, in the parentheses, there's a local collection he's doing, right? So Phillips. He's in the city of Arles. He's left Paris behind. He doesn't like the big city. He wants to establish an artist community in the south of France. And so at Arles, there's a public garden. We were there this summer. We didn't go to the public garden. I wonder if they're still there. I've been to Arles this summer, too. Anyway, near Arles. At this public garden. And again, we see him using color in a non-representational way, non-objective way. The colors that we see and the way the paint is applied is subjective. It seems to give us insight into what he thinks and how he feels, more than what we see. There's that distinction, right? Subjective versus subjective. And I have just one detail of the brushwork to show you. I love this, right? When I saw it in film tape, it looks like Japanese calligraphy. You know, the way the plants are handled next to the fence in the lower right corner. Right? It's not entirely objective.
how he paints. And when we think about this idea about the subjectivity of Van Gogh's work, interestingly, I take it back, I do have other slides too. This is a public park. Public parks are wonderful places to go and gather and congregate. Look at the people in this park. And in particular, nobody is talking to each other. Everybody is isolated here too. And if you know this about Van Gogh, the one who knows him will cut off his nut. Right? He cut off his ear at one point. Right? Where his best friend Diane, who left him because he was off his nut. And he went out, ear in hand, and said, "Oh, please stay." Of course, he was not. Right? But if you look here, if we think about Van Gogh's quite precarious psychological position, then this part where people should be engaging with each other is a very, very lonely place. Everyone is isolated. And if you think about Van Gogh setting up easels to paint it, because he does paint outside, he's even further removed from all of that. He's out here. Where's his vantage point with this? The park, the place of gathering, nobody's even gathering anyway. He's out there, and he's got this line, right, that says, "That's there, you're here." And look at what's between us and the park. This creepy guy with no face, right? Reading the papers, is blocking us psychologically from getting into the park as well. So that subjectivity that we talked about with the self-portrait and how the paint is manipulated can also come through in the subject matter as well. And that's a key part of post-impressionism that really will carry over into many of our modern movements as we move into the 20th century. An interest in subjectivity, right? An interest in feeling and emotion, right? Expression. Personal expression. Now, what's coming up next? I don't know why I have that slide, because that's one of the slides is better, and I forgot to get rid of the other one. Our other post-impressionist that is really important for, I have notes in this, the other post-impressionist who is important for the modern art in a similar but very different way is Paul Cézanne. He was part of the original group of impressionists. So in 1874, right, when Manet chose to put the railways in Toulon, and Monet and others organized this splinter group, this rebel group, the Impressionists, Cézanne was part of that group of 30 rebels. Had a long career, he died in 1906. Eventually he left Paris for the south of France as well, settled in Aix-en-Provence, where he grew up, right outside Marseille. This is hanging held in the Bastille behind Marseille. It's in the White House collection, but it's been on loan to the National Gallery for the last 12 years. There's some White House works in there. And it looks like so there, I wait for the guards around the room. Got it. But what makes Cézanne important for modernism? He too is very much interested, and again, the work of art is some work of art. What makes it Cézanne is that dialogue between him and the canvas. But it's different for Van Gogh. It's not about wild gestural brushwork. It's about a very deliberate deconstruction and reconstruction of the elements that make up the composition. When Cézanne sets up easel, he can paint outside. When he sets up easel to paint this little tone piano, right? Piano. And he looks at it when he's thinking about the final product, which is this, let's just say 2x3 foot canvas. He started with something that he observed, but what he's most worried about is how the things fit together on this two-dimensional surface. So what he does in the back of his mind, he breaks it all apart, puts it back together, and sometimes he dishes stuff. He leaves stuff out, melts it, because what he wants is the composition to hang together well. So if we look at various details of this, you'll notice that what he's done is he brings colors from one part of the composition down into another part, right? So the blue of the hills show up in the shadows of the houses. Right? This part here, without the line on the outside, you easily see the extension of that mountain. I mean, and the reason he's doing that is to unify the composition, bring the different parts together. And so as he's doing this, sometimes he'll even begin to blur distinctions. So he's kind of like a bit of a roof line here. Then all of a sudden it just sort of washes away there. Right? What happens in this area here? We don't know what's going on there. Is that little bit where the gutter line disappears? Right? Is that the edge of the house in that? If it is, then how do we cover that window? It doesn't really make sense. Right? But the point is, it does make sense in the composition that all the parts work together. So again, like Van Gogh, what we look at, what we appreciate with the TikTok, is the degree to which we become aware of the steps the artist took to make the work of art more subjective, more personal. Right? But it's very different. It's not expressionistic in any way, like Van Gogh was. Right? Nice details here, where you can see it's almost as if he washed this whole color down in here and then decided to come back in and make a house out of it. Simply because without that little line here, there's nothing to distinguish the mountain behind from the wall in front. Right? And if you think about doing this in 1885, this is really kind of a brave and modern thing to be doing. It's to be breaking the rules. Even though there's some shadow of this really is very, very similar to the green behind it. So when Cezanne is painting, he's going out, he's looking very carefully. He's thinking it through, and he's breaking it apart in his mind, and he's sort of reconstructing it in a way that doesn't necessarily have to follow exactly what he saw, because it's okay to dip that if it's not working in the composition. And otherwise, just can't. Right? If that's all you want is something that looks just like it, get rid of it because it doesn't work in the composition. As we move toward the end of Cezanne's life, these deconstruction and reconstruction of his work becomes even stronger, so that the tree on the right, for example, is broken apart into a series of almost like quilts, doesn't it? These patches of flat color that butt up against one another. And sort of the slightest hint that it's tree. The road down below, it's the road that bends around that hill. So this road here goes this way and goes here around this house on the side. You can find roads like this everywhere in the South Central. But at the same time, that road doesn't really seem to go back into space so much as it seems to sit on the surface of the canvas, right? Because he's less concerned about it. He can't do it. He can't. That's not what he's worried about. He's worried about how the different parts of the composition work with each other. Knit that together. And instead he's broken it apart, puts it back together again. One of the things that we see often in Cezanne, and we certainly see it here, is the degree to which he often leaves parts of the canvas utterly bare. So the white that you're seeing down here, right, well, that's just unpromised, that's the canvas, okay. Because what's important for him about the parts is he is painting and he knows when to just stop. Okay? So again, it's this dialogue between Cezanne and the canvas. It's not at all, you would never mistake him for a Van Gogh. Right? None of those calligraphic, expressionist brushstrokes, but instead a sense of structure. Right? And that's exactly what Cezanne said he was trying to do. He said that, the impressionists were all well and good, but what they lack is structure. That there's nothing timeless about their works that will make them last for future generations. He said, the way you do that, the way you get that lasting structure, you go out and look at nature, and you treat it as if it were geometric shapes. Cones, and cylinders, and cubes. Right? You should treat all of nature that way. Simplify it. In order to really think about how we want to construct things, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because you can put cones and cylinders and cubes back together a lot easier than you can nebulous organic shapes, right? So everything becomes this sort of blockiness, which I find incredibly wonderful, right? This nice close-up of how you can see he's really working at the canvas, not like Van Gogh, but with these patches of color. Right? Our last example is over the Hill Special, which is, again, even more bare canvas. Right? I don't know if he thinks of these things as being finished or unfinished. The bottom line is that the year he died. So there's every chance that he eventually planned to work on it longer. But what's fascinating about this is that this is a business view. So Van Gogh is a state in the town of X, or the AIX, the town of X, and it looks out over a field, and beyond the field is a mountain, mole standing flat. And this is the outline of the mountain. That bare canvas that he hasn't touched yet, much at all. That's where the mountain will go. And he dematerialized it to turn it into something else, to turn it into part of the composition. And the field that he's looking over, I mean, he didn't know the scene of multi-declaring stuff, 20 of them. We know that there are houses out here in the field, there's a viaduct, arched viaduct out here as well. And almost none of that appears. The tree that comes over this way, and that disappears as well. And if we look at it and we think about the fact that the right bit is the mountain, look at how solid this guy is. And in order to sort of focus on the structure of how it fits together, one of the tricks that he makes is really solid things seem transparent. And he makes it really transparent, it seems solid. The sky is transparent, but it looks like granite. The mountain is solid and it's hardly been painted at all. Right? It's sort of, again, amazingly gutsy choice to have made and to try to pull off, right? Because there are 1,000 ways to say it. Right? And just to give you an idea of what Monte Carlo looks like, this is up in the Baltimore routine, right? So that's the mountain that we're seeing. First from the same side. It's a bit closer here, there's a rock quarry there. But this profile, right, is now beginning to see where the ghost is on the right. Yeah. And he, like I said, he loved this, and he's often painting it, and again with that same sense of breaking things apart, putting them all back together. So sort of wrap up the post-impressionist part. With Van Gogh and Cézanne, right, we're seeing the thinking share its focus with what's being painted and how it's being painted. And as that becomes equally shared, and this is the tradition that started with Manet, right? And in fact, when Manet was criticized, the people defended him saying, it doesn't matter what he painted. That was the defense. It matters that he painted. So it starts with Manet, we work our way through to post-impressionism, to this idea that the painting has equal value in what it represents, which is the tradition of Western art, going all the way back to the Renaissance beyond, right? And how it represents it, what or how the artist paints. Right? So with that, we're going to move into our first sort of major modern ism, if you will, or major modern movement. So post-impressionism is really the legacy of the 19th century, even though we're into the 20th, which is Cézanne. But we're going to be looking at a movement called symbolism. And it has various offshoots. And so we'll start with Paul Gauguin, simply because he was friends with Van Gogh. They were good buddies, and in fact spent quite a bit of time together, both in the south of France and Arles, but also had met originally up in Paris. Right? So, Cézanne shows us the priority of composition. Van Gogh shows us the importance of subjectivity. These things are important to remember. They are the building blocks of early modern art. Right? So, these two things kind of come together, I think, on a certain level with Gauguin. The self-portrait, as you can see the date there, is entirely subjective. The colors that Gauguin chooses have nothing to do with observed reality. So he's taking, in many ways, what Van Gogh had done and is going even a step further with it. There's this lurid red in the background that he loves to use, that bright yellow in the foreground. Even the face itself, you'll notice, looks almost mask-like in how he treats it. Look at the edge of shadow on his cheek, for example. And then there are these elements that are included in it that are obviously not objective, like his halo, right?
We know he's no saint, and even if he were, you don't see halos in reality. Right? This is a very, very subjective point of view. The increased element of this subjectivity can be seen by looking at next to Van Gogh. He was painted the same year, they knew each other. By this point, they had split up as friends. Gauguin had gone away to Brittany, northwestern France, leaving Van Gogh in Arles. Gauguin said that there was a particular thing he was trying to do with his painting. He called it synthetism. Think of synthesizing, right, as a term, synthesizing. Synthetism, which is one of many offshoots of this movement that we call symbolism. But it's his further step in the direction of subjectivity. Now, stylistically, it's characterized by what you see here, which are large fields of color, unmodulated, flat, like that field of red, the field of yellow, that violate any perspective, that flatten out the picture so it doesn't look three-dimensional anymore, or at least not as three-dimensional anymore. And Van Gogh explained what that style would do, right? What the final result would be on you, the viewer. He said that synthetism tried to synthesize three different things. Tried to make synthesis of the things that you see, the outward appearance of things. You synthesize that, right? You know what the word synthesizing means. Bring together, meld as one, right? You synthesize that with your own feelings about it. So you try to keep a balance between these things. And the third thing that you bring into your synthesis is a focus on line, color, and form. Aesthetics, right? Those three things. That's what he said. Right? So we have writings from almost all these people talking about the things they are in fact trying to achieve. And it led him toward a much more abstract style than what his friend Van Gogh was doing. Much less representational, right? Where it's getting more and more flat, more and more close to non-representational or abstract painting, right? He even talked about this further. He wrote a lot, and Gauguin did. He said, color is enigmatic, and you need to use it enigmatically. In other words, color doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't reveal what it means. It's a mystery. And you should use it mysteriously, an enigma, right? And so he wants to use color divorced from description, more so than Van Gogh. Van Gogh's already on his way there, but Gauguin is much further down that route. He advised other paintings Gauguin did, or other painters, don't paint too much after nature. He told the painters, remember that art is abstract. It's an abstraction. Abstract means to pull from, right? So don't mimic nature, pull things from it. And make sure that your art doesn't follow nature too closely, right? He said to derive your abstractions from nature while dreaming in front of it. Right? Ooh, I kind of like that as a quote, right? Go out and look and dream, and then paint the dream, not what you're seeing, right? Now, how do you do that out? I don't know. A six-pack? Take it out? Right? Whatever. Right? So, synthetism is part of it. But then there's this other thing with Gauguin that we'll talk a lot about, which is the meaning of the work, the symbolic content of these things. Because for Gauguin, and this is where he comes close to this movement called the symbolist, right, is that he's blurring the lines between good and evil. So let's look at this picture, right? Gauguin is a saint, isn't he? He's got a halo. And you'll notice that the yellow isn't his clothes or anything, right? The yellow that you see is simply this area of tone. Look how it tucks under his chin, right? And the red as well. They're not anything but colors on the composition. And what they do is they isolate his head, don't they? Because it's rendered in three dimensions. It's got some shading to it. And it almost makes it look like he's been beheaded. It's just this floating head there against this gold and red background. Right? So if we think about the halo with that in mind, it's almost like he's some martyred saint, like John the Baptist or something. Someone who's been beheaded, but he's not. He's still alive. Right? After the beheading, if you will. Now, he's not as literal as that. He's just sort of suggesting this dream-like fantasy of the floating saint's head there. Now, we add to that the other details that we can see, and we see that directly behind his head is what? Apples. What do those mean? What are apples? Original sin. They are the way that Satan tempted Adam and Eve. Right? He told them, he said, don't do it. Right? Do not do that. And by the way, Gauguin's painting in Brittany, they are famed for their apples. Right? Brittany apple cider is, Gauguin's printer out there. Right? But the apple tree is a part of Brittany where he's painting this. But yeah, it's a reference. So on one hand, we've got Gauguin as the saint. On the other hand, we've got this reference to original sin. And Hunter, I heard you say something. He's got the snake. So the snake, you know, in the Bible, the snake in Eden isn't Satan. It's Satan's emissary. It's the thing he sent there to sort of speak his words to Eve to get her to fall. So that means that Gauguin is both saint and devil. Right? He is tempting us. And I mean, Gauguin's a creep. Well, I don't know how much character assassination I want to do here, but later. I like this idea of him as this person, because whether you're a saint or you're a devil, you inspire. You make people do something differently because of your presence. And he's putting this into a picture which I think gives a kind of powerful message of what he thinks his art can do. His art can inspire. His art can change your outlook. Right? Can make you do things you hadn't thought you were capable of doing. Either for good or for bad. Right? So he's both of these things. And I'm only saying this because I should have this up there. So, yeah! So he's staring at you that closely, right? But then now you'll be tempted or saved by Gauguin's evil eye, right? But his art has this potential, right? Now, when we think about the group that he's involved with, this group called the Symbolists, this is something we find throughout their writings as well. It's this idea that spirituality, remember Gauguin said the dream in front of landscapes, right? So this other world that's not governed by rationality and logic and observation in the world around you, there's another world that we as humans inhabit, and that's the world of thoughts and ideas and the spirit, right? The supernatural, the metaphysical. And what the Symbolists believed, and Gauguin is right in this camp, is that we should be thinking about those things. But when we think about dreams, we shouldn't only think about the good ones. What about the nightmares too? And when we think about the spiritual realm, the metaphysical realm, we shouldn't only think about heaven, but what about hell? You know, we should only think about the saints, but what about the sinners? What about the demons? And that they're all on kind of an equal playing field, because what they do is they help to get us away from here, this world, to someplace better, different than the daily life. Now, if you think about art, going all the way back to the caves, right, prehistoric man, what's the point of making art? Is to show, I think, to show somebody something that you see that they might not have seen. To enlighten, to change, to open up perspectives and avenues. So why do we put this moral stricture on it should only be A versus B? Especially in the modern world, right? So there's this, Gauguin, a blurring of the distinction between good and bad. Right? Between saints and sinners. They're all the same for him because they are all avenues that get us away from the horrible world around you to someplace else. And throughout his life, that's what Gauguin was trying to find. Right? He went first to Arles with Van Gogh, and then up to Brittany in northwestern France, looking for a world and a society that hadn't been corrupted by modern technology, by the Industrial Revolution. You want a world that is simple and timeless and traditional. Okay? That's what he's interested in finding. And if we think about his art as a way of getting us away from that as well, this all begins to fit together. Now, from his Brittany period, and the most famous work by Gauguin, except for the one that's online, we see another of these images that's this weird sort of visionary experience. Again, the flatness of synthetism, unnatural colors laid almost like stained glass. We often talked about being inspired by stained glass, where you can feel the color surrounded by a harsh outline. Right, so you got this red ground. You've got strange juxtapositions of scale. You have women kneeling in the back, but there's a cow in front of them that's about the size of a large dog, right? Seeming to kneel down as well. This is a group of women who have emerged from church on Sunday morning. In the town square outside, Gauguin describes this, in the town square outside, they see a couple of men wrestling, which apparently was a tradition in Brittany, to have wrestling matches in the city square. And they've heard a sermon about Jacob wrestling with the angel from the book of Genesis. And they look at these men wrestling, and they have a vision, a collective vision, based on this sermon. Right? So here they are all coming out. Interesting, this congregation is entirely women. They are not nuns. That is traditional Breton women's headwear. And the preacher, the only man there, is in the lower right corner, and it's him. It's Gauguin. In Lost Profile. Look at the schnoz. Right? That's Gauguin as the preacher. So we have that same thing where he's inspiring us, right? He's the one that's gotten them to see something they don't normally see by being the preacher in this narrative he's made up. But then there's the tree, the apple tree, that separates them from their vision. So again, original sin, right? Let's see. Saint, sinner, right? Angel, demon. Right? That's how Gauguin sees himself. Brittany wasn't enough. Gauguin eventually goes back to Paris for a little bit, and then he decides that I need a culture that's even more unspoiled than the northwestern tip of France. And he gets on a boat, and he sails to the South Pacific. Not by himself, on a merchant boat, right? He's not out there rigging sails. Although he has been a sailor before for a bit. And, this brings us I need to tell you this. I love the way he signs his name, Pigot, like way before J-Lo, right? But if you say Pigot in French, it's peg-go. And that's sailor's slang for penis. Your peg, right? Your pego. So this whole idea of saint and sinner and tempter and whatnot is wrapped up with a rather overt, broad, and nasty sexuality, right? When he gets to Tahiti, he sets up a house that he calls the House of Orgasm, the Maison de Jouet, right, which is the House of Orgasms. He's ditched his wife and kids. He's married, he has 2 children, and he leaves them behind. His wife's Danish, right, from Copenhagen, and he leaves them behind to go live somewhere else. And when he gets to Tahiti, one of the local tribes that he's trying to infiltrate so that he can get to know more of this unspoiled way of life, they give him a bride. She's 14. That's her. He's her first. He deflowered her, right? And this is believed to be sort of the first painting after that, or 1 or 2 or 3 that he did. He's a creep, right? And it's just, there's things about him that I don't find worthwhile looking up to. So, here we are now, Gauguin in Tahiti, right? French Polynesia, colonies of France. And he's hoping again to find a kind of world where industry hasn't even come close, right? And he goes back into the woods, and he sort of turns his back. There's a lot of industry going on down there because of the merchant marines and sailing and trading, but he turns his back on that. Right? We never see him depicted. And instead he focuses on the natives, and he kind of molds them into his view of what they should be like. Right? So that's his 14-year-old bride, and the words of the devil. Right? Is that the title? Parahu Natevura Ino. He spends 1891 to 1893. He's living in Tahiti. Goes back to Paris for about 2 years. Takes with him 60 canvases. He's painted volumes in Tahiti. All of them with only Polynesian dialect titles. So people are like, huh? I don't get it. And I think he doesn't want to nail it down. But the translation of that is words of the devil. Words of the devil. Right? Now, if we think about that title and this work, and we think about what Gauguin has already been doing, words of the devil fit right in, don't they? He's already been dealing with the theme of original sin, where the words of the devil made Eve take that apple, give it to Adam. And it was the words of the devil working through Eve that got Adam to do it. Right? Here, is there a devil? Is this thing in the background the devil? Maybe that's what it is. Look at that foot. Right? It's totally, the proportions of all, and then those hands and those eyes. There's something quite frightening about that kneeling figure in the background. But then the other question is, if we know what we know about Gauguin, that this is his child bride, that was a gift to him from the local tribe that he's sort of set himself up around, then maybe it's Gauguin who speaks the words of the devil. That she's listened to him. And thus has fallen from grace. That she's been like Eve in the Garden of Eden, right? And she's listened to the words of the devil, and that's ruined it. Maybe Gauguin is seeing his presence here in Tahiti as being that exact thing that he hoped to avoid. That he's the one that's come in, and he's changed things by his presence. Now, adding to all of this is the fact that he bases her pose on images of Eve. I think I brought in a dozen. I just thought of this one by Masaccio, early Renaissance picture, right? But the way her hands are proportioned, I don't know if you knew this one for reproduction or not, but she's covering herself slightly, and she ends up looking very, very similar to Eve after the fall, after she's listened to the words of the devil. Right? She is an Eve-like figure. Now, Rome people, who else does she kind of look like with this pose? Venus, exactly right. Did you do that one in the class? Somebody talked about it, right? But yeah, it looks like a classical image of Venus. Now, everyone thought of Kelly because he doesn't know. But old Roman statues of Venus or Renaissance versions of Venus. So again, this is that exact same complicated message that Gauguin's been giving us elsewhere, which is good and bad, right? Venus is the goddess of love. She's good. Eve, bad, right? The original sin. The one who tempts men. And he's making it so that she's kind of a little bit of both, in the same way that our self-portrait of Gauguin is a little bit of both as well. Right? That's her as well, with the bright red thumb. With again, all of these sort of right at the moment that they have come together. Right? And I brought it in just to sort of talk about that. So there's more about Gauguin online. One of the things that brought us to Tahiti as well is this interest in unnatural colors. We haven't really talked about that, but you get to imagine that the ground there is not purple and orange. Right? The flowers aren't quite as red as they appear here. That is, again, what Gauguin said about how to use color. Right? Don't use it for descriptive purposes. Use it for its emotional impact. Right? That's where we're going next. Okay. Different artist. Odilon Redon. The L is silent. Odilon Redon. Or Redon. Also from the National Gallery. An image of Pandora. When Gauguin left Paris for Tahiti, so I remember he's all over France. He goes to the south with Van Gogh, 1888. Goes up to Brittany for 3 years, 88 to 91. Goes back to Paris. Right? And from Paris, he departs for Tahiti. When he's in Paris, he starts to hang out with a group of poets and philosophers who are known as the Symbolists. So the movement known as the Symbolists. So Gauguin is really part of that group, and Gauguin's interest in good or bad, leading us to a metaphysical place, is something that he shared with the Symbolists. And when he left for Tahiti, these Symbolists got together and gave him a farewell dinner, right, as he's leaving them behind. Officially, they were known as the Society of Independent Artists, but they formed 1886, and they had a manifesto. Now, that's kind of an interesting thing. It's the first time we've heard about this, a manifesto. Who knows what a manifesto is? Sorry? It's like a protest, kind of. It's in writing. It's a written protest. It's a statement of, it's an agenda. It's a statement of intent. This is what we stand for. This is what we're trying to do. And very few artistic movements prior to the Symbolists had a manifesto. A term that we use, you might not know this one, but when an airline or ship registers its itinerary, along with the people that are on it, it's called a manifest, which kind of comes from the same, right? This is where we're going. This is who we are, right? So a manifesto, there's a manifesto for the Symbolist movement that talks about exactly what they are trying to do. The Impressionists didn't have a manifesto, right? They were a group, they kind of had a group identity, but you didn't have to sign on the dotted line, right? And you didn't have any input into some sort of shared agenda, right? That was actually put in writing. But it's one of the things that we'll see with a lot of modern movements becomes sort of the norm from this point forward. Okay? So when we look at the manifesto, which was, by the way, published in the daily paper in Paris, in Le Figaro, so they wanted people to hear it, right? They weren't just writing it out to stick it in their pocket and post it on the studio door. They think they're going to have an impact on society, so they publish it in the most widely circulated newspaper in Paris. Right? They think this is going to have an agenda. And their ideas that they published distilled down just like what we've been talking about with Gauguin, that our true emotions and our spiritual nature is not to be found in the world around us. The only place that we can get in touch with our emotional side, with our spiritual nature, is through dreams, through mythologies, right? Through narratives of the supernatural. But the world around us won't help at all. Right? Only through reflection. Right? Only through getting away from observed reality can we get there. It is the Symbolists that say there's no such thing as a negative spirituality. Right? Saint said it. They are all ways of getting away from the physical world and toward the metaphysical world. The forces of good and evil. That's who we are. That's what makes us human. Is that we all wrestle with having those inside of us. So don't deny it. Right? We want to make things that are subjective visible. So art should be making visible things that are invisible, rather than simply replicating things that you can see. Does that make sense? Now, who's Pandora? So Redon, by the way, when they got together in 1886, they published the manifesto. They have the group, the Society of Independent Artists. They have a little election. We're going to have a president. Right? Redon's the first president. President of the Symbolist group. Right? The original one. And by the way, they realized that artists had already been doing this, so they made a list of people they wanted to invite to join them because they're already there, in mind. A lot of the romantic painters, but okay. So, who's Pandora? Who's the subject matter here?
She's symbology, and she has the box that she opens even though she wasn't supposed to, and like academy kind of thing, and she lets all of like pestilence and war and all this stuff that she waits till they die.
Pandora's box, right? Yeah, so again, I'm going to repeat it a bit because the microphone's hearing you there, and that way it's like that. But yeah, she is very much like the Greek version of Eve, where she has a box, she's not supposed to open it, but when she does, she releases evil into the world, right? Now, according to Greek mythology, it's more than that, like Eve, she's like Eve as well, that she's the very first woman. So in other words, sorry ladies, but you've been bad from day one. That's kind of the message, right? But right, men's problems are your fault somehow. But that's kind of what this goes down to, right? We blame it on somebody else. I know. We'll sit over here in the corner and barricade it. In French, we talk about this in terms of the femme fatale, right? A woman who causes fate, right? In this case, the woman who causes death and destruction, right? Pandora is a femme fatale. And that's, with the simplest interest in things good and bad being equally okay, we're going to see quite a few images of femme fatales as well, coming out of this particular movement, right? I want to show you 3 of those just to get an idea of what the stuff looks like. I actually really liked it. He was a printmaker as well. So this particular work is a lithograph with laminated papers, right? So the yellow that you see is a laminated paper as well, machine collé paper. Beatrice, you see a little bit of blue right there. It's all very dreamlike, isn't it? Look at her head behind the laurel, the yellow laurel leaf sort of disappears into the landscape. How with Pandora on the right, she's pondering the box, but standing in this spiritual-looking landscape, that is a supernatural-looking landscape, where we see flowers. Rodin studied botany, but he's not trying to replicate it. They just become these explosions of color surrounding it. Beatrice in profile here. Who's Beatrice? Anybody know that? Do you know that as well? She's not from ancient Greek mythology. She's from the late Middle Ages, early Renaissance. No? She comes from Dante, D-A-N-T-E, right? His poetry. She was a girl that grew up in the family, his neighbors. And they first met when he was 9 and she was 8. And he fell immediately in love with her, Dante did. Obsessively so through the rest of his life. They never saw each other again until 20 years later. Not 10 years later, late teens. They see each other again. He sees her on a bridge in Florence, crossing the street, and he remembers having seen her as a child, and that he's still in love with her. She's already married to somebody else, or is engaged to. He watches her get married, and she dies when she's 24. And he remains obsessed through the rest of his life with Beatrice. Right? Dante's Beatrice. She's his muse. She's his inspiration. Now, she's wearing laurel wreaths in her hair. Laurel wreaths are a symbol of inspiration in poetry. They're a symbol of poets as well. This is Beatrice as inspiration. Is she a femme fatale? No. Right? But it doesn't matter, because really it's about women as inspiration in both of these. Right? Inspiration for the evils in the world, inspiration for Dante's poetry throughout his entire career. One last slide and then we'll quit. Sometimes they're not as literary as all of that. Sometimes you have no idea what the heck this is meant to be. Just mystery. Woman, long hair, pondering, sitting in front of a table, covered with flowers, looking at nature, and maybe through looking at nature, moving into something else, something more spiritual, pondering. Is she a femme fatale? Is she a point of inspiration? Is she being inspired? Those are pretty fantastic. I wish we had more time for him. I wish we had more time for all of these guys. Right? Now, it's 1:15, so we're done. But let me just, a couple things. We're not quite done with symbolism yet, so we'll finish that up on Tuesday. I've got a few more people to show you, including Edvard Munch, who you may have heard of, the guy with the screen. He's coming up. But we'll be moving in from this into Fauvism on Tuesday as well. So if you want to read ahead, right? We're wrapping up symbolism and moving into the faux immediately after that, okay? So that's where we'll be on Tuesday, and have a good weekend. And I'll see the two of you who are at the National Gallery. Anybody else wants to join us? Again, 10 o'clock tomorrow, in front of the new building, the angular one, right? And if you're lost, just look for us. I'm loud. Okay?